Hello. Hello and welcome to Hershey Area All Things Diversity's event, the LatinX Hispanic Presence in Central Pennsylvania. I'm Amy Ziegler with the Hershey Story Museum, Hershey Gardens, and a member of our diversity group. Hershey Area All Things Diversity is a free series of programs to create awareness and promote acceptance and inclusion in our community. It is coordinated by representatives from Derry Township, the Hershey Story Museum, Derry Township School District, Milton Hershey School, the Hershey Company, Penn State Milton S Hershey Medical Center, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts Company, and Hershey Trust Company. Tonight, we are pleased to have as our speaker, Dr. Hector Ortiz. Dr. Ortiz will talk about the basics in understanding culture, diversity, and differences, and the framework of intercultural communication. This presentation will define who is Latino, a Hispanic, or a Latinx, similarities and differences in the Latino Hispanic community, as well as how culture, language, and traditions interact with different generations of Latino, Hispanic, and Latinx communities. At the end of the presentation, please put your questions in the chat on YouTube and we'll share them with our speaker. Also, you will be emailed a short survey following tonight's event, and we hope that you will help us to evaluate our impact by taking a few moments to fill that out. I'm going to hand it over to Susan Court, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much, Amy. My name is Susan Court. I'm a Derry Township supervisor and a proud member of Hershey Area All Things Diversity. We are so excited to wrap up Hispanic Heritage Month tonight with our speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce him. It's my honor to introduce our speaker tonight. I first met Dr. Ortiz when he served as Rotary District 7390 District Governor the year that I was the president of the Hershey Rotary Club. I'm sure you will find, as I know, he is a very engaging speaker and very passionate about tonight's topic. Dr. Hector Ortiz has been working on issues of human rights and civil rights, equality, socioeconomic disparities, diversity, and inclusion for the past 25 years. He is the founder and former president of Estamos Unidos de Pennsylvania, a grassroots not-for-profit organization created to promote cultural awareness and post-secondary opportunities for children. He is also the co-founder and former president of the Latino Hispanic Professional Association of Central Pennsylvania, the co-founder and former charter president of the Latino Hispanic American Community Center, and the founder of the Dauphin County Diversity Forum. From 2015 to 2020, Dr. Ortiz served as an assistant professor and director of graduate studies, as well as senior director of community engagement and partnerships, Office of Advancement and Strategic Initiatives at Central Penn College. He also serves as an inspirational speaker and a consultant in diversity, leadership development, communication, and translation interpretation services. Hector, thank you so much for offering to speak to our group tonight. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Amy. And thank you, everyone who is joining us tonight to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month and hopefully to learn a little more about how to better interact, how to better communicate, how to better understand this very unique model called Latino Hispanic LatinX community. And today, I'm going to be sharing some thoughts, some ideas, and some definitions that can help us to better understand this very dynamic and changeable community. Let me start sharing my screen, and don't be afraid for the slides. I will not use all of them. I just want as a reference, and be sure that if you are interested in any of the topics, you can go a little more ahead and deeply research in order to better understand what we are talking about tonight. Again, I am sharing my screen, and I hope everyone can see this now. Let me go a little more from the beginning and be sure that all of you can see this. Please let me know if everyone can see. Perfect. I think we are now in the same page. Understanding diversity, the Latino Hispanic LatinX in Southern Pennsylvania, similarities, differences, and contributions to this Commonwealth and to this country. Okay.
Hector, maybe let me stop you just for a moment. Could you go into the, oh, there you are. I was going to say, if you could go into the presentation where we can see it full screen.
Yes,
Perfect.
I
Thank
think
you.
now we have.
Yes,
Perfect.
we're good. Thank
Right.
you.
Excellent. Today I'm going to be talking some concepts about culture and language, because these two elements are very important in order to understand Latino Hispanics in Pennsylvania and in the United States. Let me start defining culture. What is culture? Really are traditions, patterns of behaviors, attitudes, language, thoughts, values, belief system, and different ways of communication that any group may have, and they associate, they come together, they partner as a group in something that they share. That's culture, and in that way, culture is defined for two or more people can create a culture, can create a group. And more importantly, culture acts as a template in anything that we do. Culture helps us to shape behaviors and beliefs, and is passed from one generation to another. That's what it is important. So when we talk about culture, it's not just about ethnicity, which is different, but ethnicity is part of the culture, but culture is a bigger dimension. We can have different cultures, even in any institution. A department can be a culture. In that way, I just want to be sure that we understand that culture is a behavioral approach that people may share with others. Let's define culture again. The patterns, attitudes, belief, gender, ethnicity, individual groups make us or make them unique. That's how we define culture. And culture in many views is what we call the lens to people see others. Culture can help us to understand others. And if we are open to culture, to organizational culture, to dimensions of culture, we can be able to see how others behave or act in different ways. In other views, or many other researchers consider culture as a common interchange of norms, values, and traditions. That's when we are now entering the different ways of cultural communication. In my view, there is three basic elements of cultural communication. One is multicultural communication, transcultural communication, and intercultural communication. This is a phase growing up, moving up from the bottom, which is multicultural communication, to cross-cultural communication and intercultural communication, which is a process of communicating better and understanding different cultures. Culture implies the recognition, the understanding, the acceptance of cultural difference that people bring. It's a process. Start with knowing. First, you have to know. When you know, you have to acknowledge that there are some similarities of difference. When you acknowledge, then you move to understanding, to respect, and finally to accept a different culture. It's a process and doesn't start just one day and finish with a training that we may have the opportunity to receive. So this is just in general, what is culture and how this culture involves the different ways of behaviors that you can find in the Latino Hispanic community. Let's see now some differences and similarities in this culture called Latino Hispanic LatinX community and how we arrive at this definition of names, which we are going to be talking about later on. Difference and similarities in the Latino Hispanic community. I'm going to be using 4 elements very quickly to define language, culture, traditions, and spirituality. This is just 4 of hundreds of elements that can differentiate a culture. In this case, the Latino Hispanic culture. Language is the basic, is the ways that we communicate. Spanish is again, a language that is spoke in many ways in the United States. And even that Latino Hispanic Latinx members of this community represent more than 60 million people in the United States. Can you believe that 2/3 of those, more than 70%, are very proficient in English? Most from all the Latino Hispanic in the United States, almost 70% speak English. And Spanish is the second language that they speak. Culture, we talk a little bit about culture, we talk a lot a little bit about traditions and spirituality. Again, the faith community that people in the Latino Hispanic congregation brings is also important. They are believers in many ways. Let's talk about language, because yes, we speak Spanish, but we also, even in language, have a lot of differences. We can speak the same language, but have different dialects. Remember, we come from 26 countries, and even in the same country, even in my country of origin, Ecuador, people speak with different dialects, and people speak different languages. In Mexico, which is a big country again, you may have several hundreds of dialects, and people may not necessarily speak Spanish if they come from these particular countries. People who are from the Aborigine or indigenous communities may not speak Spanish. In other words, don't make the assumption because a person is from Mexico or from Guatemala or Ecuador or Peru that you can assume that they speak Spanish. It's not the case. That's what we want to create, this understanding, this knowing, this acknowledging of the difference that we have. We can speak the same language and words, but all those words may have different meanings. And as I came to the United States, I discovered and rediscovered that a word that used to be having a meaning for me in my particular culture, my particular background, my particular country, has a different meaning in another country. This is how diverse we have, how much diversity we have in the Latino Hispanic community. People may come from the same country, region, and family, and we still may differ. When people ask me, and probably many of you have done this before, and ask me, what's your favorite food dish in Ecuador? This is a question that is, again, you can ask because you are curious, you want to know a little more, but I cannot define my whole country, 16 million people, what is the favorite food of that country. Even in my own family, I like shrimp and I like seafood. My sister may not like seafood, may not like shrimp. In that way, in my own family, I cannot define what is the favorite dish in my family. Do you understand that? You see the difference? Even that you had the best intention, sometimes we are creating stereotypes and generalizing unconsciously without any intention to create bad. Just we have to start being conscious and cultural competent in order to do the right questions and to make the right approach. Again, just mentioning how we share those similarities and differences. We have a history that is very rich, but also very complex, very dynamic, very changeable. And even in the United States, something unique that we have, because in this immigrant community that we have, in the Latino community, the word Latino is just known in the United States. In other countries, I just came from Europe. I just was in Switzerland just 2 weeks ago. And I asked, because of my background in the United States, I asked how the Latino community is here. And people start looking at me, what do you mean Latino community? Doesn't exist. In places like Switzerland, people come from Ecuador, they are Ecuadorians, and this is an Ecuadorian culture group that come together. People from Colombia, they are there, but they are Colombians. Here in the United States, to facilitate, and we'll talk a little bit later on, we create this word Latino, or we create this word Hispanic. And we got used to, because of the number of people that we have now in the United States, more than 60 million people. In that way, we are part of something bigger than ourselves, bigger than just an Ecuadorian and Peruvian and Colombian. And this is what we call Latino Hispanic community in the United States. Again, there are immigrants and many generations. In the Latino Hispanic community, it's very complex because we can have here even 5 or 6 generations of Latinos, and you can find all ways of people, all ways of life in these 5 or 6 generations. People who have been here from the beginning, since this nation, this country exists as a United States of America. We had people from Mexico who were already here, living in what we call now United States of America. And we have newcomers that probably just arrived a couple of weeks ago who came in a legal way, who came as a parent, as a mother, as a son, as a daughter, as a spouse of somebody else who have Latino Hispanic heritage. In that way, we all share these very unique but very diverse ways of coming to the United States of America. So those create strong differences, but also we have the first, second, third, and again, 5, 6 generations of Latinos in the United States. Latinos are certainly making a dramatic impact. And I just heard again this morning that we had 1.7 trillion in buying power. Buying power of the Latino community represent easily can be the 7th greatest economy of the world, the Latino Hispanic community, the 7th greatest economy in the whole world, just because of the growing of this population. Again, as we move forward, we try to adjust the value system that we have, the different beliefs that we have, the norms, the traditions, the artifacts that we use as we came to the United States has to be adapted and adjusted as we are part of a greater community. But one thing is important, in general, overall, Latino Hispanics, LatinX value very highly education. There are kids who may be Latinos, have Latino names, have Latino heritage, and they may not speak Spanish. And again, we have to be cognitive of that and recognize that when you see a Latino name, Maria Rodriguez, for instance, doesn't necessarily mean that Maria Rodriguez has integrated in the Latino Hispanic community. Many reasons, and again, we can spend probably 2 hours just talking about why or why not we have all those differences in just this particular setting of speaking the language. Latinos share names, beliefs, traditions. We have principles and maintain a lot of links that give us what we call historical connections from the past to the present and to the future, because we come together from different geographic areas, from different cultures and different linguistic identities that again make us very dynamic as we share all of these elements in the United States. Diversity has created what we call a continuous mixture of cultures and values. In the Latino community, when we have 26 countries coming together, and each individual country, just to mention Mexico, we have a lot of subcultures, little cultures that are part of our country. And this country is part of the several countries that create the Latino Hispanic community. So what we had created what we call the interethnic and intercultural relationship with itself is a contribution for this country. There are 6,700 Latino Hispanic elected leaders already in the United States, according to NALEO, which is the National Appointed and Elected Officials Institution, which is a nationwide institution. And in 2018, they mentioned in the last research that 6,700 Latino Hispanic elected leaders already in the United States. 10 million voting in 2018, 16.6 in 2020. We are becoming part of the decision-making of anything that we do in the United States. Latino business owners grow 34% compared to 1% of all business owners in the United States. So it's not just that we are here looking for something, we are here contributing, being part of the mainstream. Yes, we still face a lot of challenges, but we are really making a difference and contributing in different ways to this culture, to this country, to this nation. Latino-owned business, for instance, account for 4% of the United States business revenue and 5.5% of the US employment. We are not just generating revenue, we generate employment and we generating growth in the United States. 4.7 million business owned by Latino Hispanics, 14% of the 33 total US business, 33% of the US business is 40% owned by Latino Hispanic, 4.7 million business, Latinos, Latinos. There is a lot of difference. Again, I just heard this morning from a presentation that yes, but Latinas tend to be more entrepreneurship oriented and tend to own more of this business that we are seeing today. Latinas, women, I mean. The Latino Hispanic LatinX represent exactly, again, can change from today and next week, but 62,080,000 people, which represents 18.7%, close to 19% of the US population. Pennsylvania is 1,050,000 in Pennsylvania. Again, growing immensely in the whole nation, but here in the Commonwealth as well. 29.8% is the median age. So the typical Latino, the average median age is 29 years old. And again, in 2010 was 27 years old. The US born children and immigrant second generation is 12% of the nation's population. This is a very young community, and that's what we have in Pennsylvania, cities like Allentown, like Reading, like Lancaster, when more than 50, 60, 70% of the younger population in these cities are Latino, Hispanics, Latinx. Again, the challenges that we have. We also have challenges that probably you can see here, 31% of Latinos are below poverty, compared with 13.5% of the general population, almost double in generational poverty. %19 of Latinos don't have health insurance. Again, many issues. Maybe that many of those may be undocumented. I cannot judge. I cannot know that. But in percentage, 19% of Latinos don't have health insurance, and the annual median income for Latino 16 and older is $23,000, which is the lowest in the state. Again, just some facts. I don't want to overpopulate with information, but just 39% of the Latinos own property, for instance, from the whole Latino population. So challenges, we also have challenges. But let me quickly use how US is becoming multi-ethnic. Why? Caucasians represent 66% 10 years ago, now just 60%. Hispanic of Latinos, 18%, now it's 50%. And in Pennsylvania, grow from 720,000 in 2010 to 1,050,000 in 2021. Black is almost steady, 12% 10 years ago, 12% now. Asian, 6% 10 years ago, 5% now. And Native Americans, again, a little growth from 0.6% to 0.7%. Again, this is just information. I don't want to spare, but let's talk about how should we call, or how you should call us Latino, Hispanic, Latinx. The word Hispanic was really intended by the US Census in 1977 to be a category, a linguistic category and ethnic heritage, not an official race. It's really the opportunity to categorize people who come from all these different countries and try to find a common denominator. That was the main intention in the 1977. This term used just as a collective use of all the people who speak Spanish. That was the initial intention. And denotes a lineage, a connection to the cultural heritage related to Spain. But when we call Hispanics, it's really those who were colonies of Spain, that were connected with Spain and have some heritage, history related to Spain. So it's right to call everyone Hispanic. Well, millions of people speak Spanish. Nevertheless, many are not necessarily true Hispanic descendants. Let's just mention Native Americans. And Native Americans, I mean in South America, Central America, in the Caribbean. In Puerto Rico, for instance, you have the Taínos. In South America, you have what we call indigenous people, but really represent a very diverse group of different ethnic groups, different aborigine groups. A million of people live in Latin America, but they don't speak Spanish. Let's just put an example, Brazilians who speak Portuguese. And we are talking about millions of people who are in Latin America, but are not necessarily from Hispanic descendants. To make a little more complex, the term Hispanics may be incorrect as a collective name for all Spanish speakers, because in many may cause even offense. Again, a person from Brazil doesn't have any connection at all with Spain, and they don't even speak the language. That's what the word Latino may be more appropriate for some groups and some descendants from these particular regions or particular geographic areas. And we will see a little more when we talk about Latinos. It may also be correct for millions of American citizens by birth, because many Latino Hispanic were born already here, and many people respond, I am in America, I was born here. Necessarily, not everyone may feel Hispanic. Yes, they had Hispanic heritage, but let's just put a little more trick on this assertion. What happened is there is a Latino Hispanic LatinX who come from a biracial relationship. Let's see, the man is Black and the woman is Latina, or the woman is white and the man is Latino Hispanic Latinx. How you should call that person? It's going to be depending on the individual. That person may say, I am American. That person may say, I am Caucasian. That person may say, I am Latino. I am Hispanic. I am Latinx. In other words, the best way to connect with this very diverse community is to ask. Don't make assumptions. Don't get perceptions. Just ask, because that's the best way to recognize the identity of the individual and recognize how we can communicate and respect, which is very important, how people would like to identify themselves. That's one of the lessons that we can learn from today. Ask and respect instead of just generalizing or making assumptions. Because again, this is a challenge that can, I just mentioned the interrelationship. And again, we can be a person who comes from an Italian background, a person who is married with a Latino Hispanic Latinx background. A lot of differences and a lot of diversity in the terminology that we can use. Let's see now what happened with Latinos. Who should call Latinos? So there is millions of people of these 60 million mentioned before that may prefer be called Latino. The term is used to refer people originating basically from Latin America. 3 reasons. First, geographic area, the geographic belonging of this geographic area. People from South America, but again, Brazilians may consider Latinos, but they don't consider Hispanic. People who come from Latin America, because also the Latin, the Romance language was originated from Latin, came French, Portuguese, and Spanish. Again, Italian, many other languages who may claim that connection with Latin. In 1997, the U.S. Office of Management and Budget issued a directive adding the term Latino to the government publications as a result of resistance to the term Hispanic. So even in 1997, 20 years after the use of Hispanic, the government now incorporated the word Latino in order to be inclusive and be sure that identify those people who may not consider themselves Hispanic, and be inclusive, identifying those who, based on this word and this direction, can be part of the United States and have an inclusive opportunity, inclusive way to be part of this Latino Hispanic community. Start using the term Latino Hispanic. Latino, again, is used to recognize the fact that this is a group of people that supersede many nationalities. It's a region now, South America, basically, Latin America, and those who may be connected with this terminology. The term Latin is a common denominator in Latin America because the Romance language that I mentioned and the majority of Latin Americans. The term Latino may be as well be an offense for many people because refer to people who speak just the Latin language that where Hispanics come from. Under these rules, as I mentioned before, French, Portuguese, and even Italians will be called Latinos, but that's not the case. So again, it's very complex, but again, we have to recognize all these differences in order to understand. For many millions, Latino is the more appropriate way to call it, but no Native Americans. Again, they inhabit the area already before the Españoles, the Spaniards came to these countries and made colonies of them. May I say that the most common and widely accepted is Latino. Nevertheless, and because of people from South America, North America, and Central America may not be considered Latinos, we are excluding if we just use the word Latino. In my view, and if you see the organizations that I have the pleasure to be part of, we start calling Latino Hispanics, Latino Hispanic Professional Association, Latino Hispanic Community Center. Why? Because instead taking an approach or identifying a group in just one particular area is not going to be inclusive. In other words, we start using the word Latino Hispanic in order to be inclusive and be sure that those who feel right be called Latinos or feel right to be called Hispanic can be part of this great group, this bigger group called Latino Hispanic. I hope and I am sure you may have some questions. And again, if any questions comes and you are monitoring the chat or the questions and answers panel, please let me know if you have any questions that I can address at any time. But if not, we will do at the end, as was mentioned by Susan. So it is right to call Latinos. Well, it is not perfect consensus. However, the best approach would be to call Latino Hispanic. And this was many years ago, because now we include in this presentation the term LatinX, and that's what we are going to be talking next. Let me just pass this and move. Distinctions between the two terms we mentioned already: Brazilians, Portuguese. Latino Hispanic refers to 25 different countries, I would say 26 cultural groups. And again, there are millions of people of Spanish descent, Hispanics who do not speak Spanish, Brazilians, for instance, and millions of people who speak Spanish, Latinos, but they are not of Hispanic descendants, Native Americans, Aboriginal, and indigenous people. So it's very complex, and all of these group of people are here in the United States. Again, we mentioned that the different denomination, let me go. Many people prefer in some areas still called Mexicans, still called Ecuadorians, still called Salvadorians. And those who are born here, first or second, third generation, they call Mexican Americans, Cuban Americans, for instance, is a very good example in Florida, particularly, the Cuban American community. Those who were born here but identified with Cuba and identified with America at the same time. Cuban American, African American, we mentioned many times. In that way, it's very diverse, a very distinct way that people prefer to be called. But let's talk about the Latinx. Really, in the 2000s, the term Latinx emerged as an alternative to the Hispanic and Latino. It's really a gender issue. Many people think that the word Latino identifies just Latino men and doesn't include Latinas or any other preferences that people may have, self-identity expression, gender expression, and many other differences that we can have, particularly by gender and many other identities. So that in 2000, the term LatinX emerged as a way to start differentiating and in order to include another group of people that we may take out if we just call Latino Hispanic. LatinX is a global movement that loves gender neutral nouns, pronouns, and many languages. Grammar uses male, female constructions. This can be an alternative for those who may not identify as a man or as a woman, as a female or as a male. In that way, came as an opportunity to be inclusive, and many people identify in this way. It's not a huge group of people, but it's a group of people, a respected group of people that prefer to be called Latinx. 23% of the Latino Hispanic population have heard the term Latin, so it's not really popular. Not everyone knows. I I have to be honest, I start knowing about LatinX just a few years ago. And remember, this was in 2000, almost 20 years ago. In that way, it's not familiar, and only 3% of the Latino Hispanic community use or know as a word about this term LatinX. Even 3% in a 60 million people is a very important group, very representative group. And that way, to be inclusive, we start calling Latino Hispanic Latinx. For some English speakers, Spanish language is a gender for, and others see Latinx as a LGBTQI group, for instance, is inclusive term. They have defined that it's an inclusive term and reflect a little more gender identity movement with the gender identity movement. In conclusion, again, there is another word that is coming, and again, it's coming part of the discussion maybe next year, in a couple of years. Many others are calling now Latino Hispanic, Latinx, Latinx, which is Latin with an E at the end. Again, it's just part of the differences that we are seeing in our communities, and we are changing, we are shifting, we are moving. And in the area of identity, we have to be open and flexible. But again, many others has changed the Latino Hispanic for Latinx, which is not the intention, was not the purpose. So be careful, be mindful, and be sure that in order to include, you don't have to exclude. And in order to be inclusive, we should ask, instead just calling different names that to people that may not feel comfortable just being called Latinx, Hispanic, or Latino. It is why the understanding and affirmation of diversity is important. The recognition of different cultures and how we communicate. Remember at the beginning, we mentioned the 3 ways that we communicate: multicultural communication, cross-cultural communication, and intercultural communication. In the multicultural communication, it's like people living in isolation. You communicate just internally. There is the Nepalese community, there is the Sudanese community, there is the Ecuadorian community. Internally, we share some values, some traditions, and we communicate inside ourselves and don't go out. That's what we call multicultural communication. Culture exists, but they communicate or live in isolation. In transcultural communication, we move a little more ahead. We try to interact with others. But one of the issues that we face in transcultural communication is that we usually compare the dominant culture against others and see what is good or what is bad. And in that way, we need to create an educational opportunity and understanding opportunity to be open to recognize why we are different and how this difference can help us to come together as a community to really educate ourselves and understand one another. In the intercultural communication, it's a higher process, a higher level of communication, when we not just educate ourselves, we not just understand others, but also we respect. And we respect come understanding, and with understanding come acceptance of differences. And because I respect and understand others, doesn't mean that I have to agree, that I have to change my values, I have to change my beliefs. It's just a very good approach to be inclusive, to recognize others, to respect others, and more importantly, to communicate with others. I think this, what we had many organizations in the region: Estamos Unidos de Pennsylvania, Latino Hispanic Professional Association, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and many other groups. There were these cultures that I mentioned when we identify ourselves and try to recognize as a group to have a presence in a bigger, greater community, Latino Hispanic American Community Center. Again, I would like to close and I'll be open to questions and answers. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progressing, working together is a success. And I think working together is the approach that we all as a community should try to reinvent, try to recreate. And in order to reinvent and to recreate, we have to start educating ourselves, asking before making assumptions, understanding, respecting others, not judges, not judge, not judgmental, but open to understand and to respect. And that's the best way to be inclusive, to be diversify our community and be able to understand one another. I think that's all that I have for today. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have, Susan or Amy.
Hector, that sounds like a quote from Hector Ortiz, not anonymous. That sounds like something you would say. That was very inspirational. And thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. We do have a few questions, and Amy's got one from our viewers on YouTube.
Yes. As being a Mexican, but not raised to speak Spanish, I've been confused about my culture. Does not being able to speak Spanish make me less of a Hispanic?
Well, language is part of what we call the culture. Doesn't make you less. I think that's a struggle that many people who are the second generation of Latino Hispanic LatinX are suffering. And there is many reasons for that. Again, our parents, the parents who came before us, the first generation of Latino Hispanics, they faced a lot of struggles, a lot of resistance, a lot of jokes from people because they were not able to speak the language, Spanish. And what they decide at that time to do with their children is let just learn the language. They don't even speak Spanish at home because they don't want their children suffer the same problems or have the same issues that they faced before. Many people, that's one of the reasons, don't continue the opportunity to learn the language and speak the language at home. That's one view. The other view is that many others know that now that we have 60 million people, speaking the language is so important and so necessary. Because again, we had a community, an elder community that needs, and there is no other way to communicate. They need to have this interaction. And a person who becomes bilingual, bicultural is very important. So to answer the question, I would say doesn't make you, but I will recommend anyone who comes from the Latino Hispanic community, we all should learn a little more about our heritage, because our heritage may help to recreate our identity, who we really are, where we really come from. And to know our past is so important as it is to know our future. In order to know our past, we can learn and we can relearn how to connect with those heritage and those past stories that our parents, grandparents have shared with us, and then to reconnect those with the future. I hope I answered the question.
Hector, when you look at the challenges that Americans of Hispanic or Latino backgrounds face, and you compare it to decades in the past, have things gotten better? Have you seen more acceptance and understanding of people from Hispanic and Latino backgrounds, or are there still a lot of challenges that are being faced?
Has been a change, Susan, is a great question. Thank you so much for asking. Has been a change and is coming more than on, but it's still a lot of challenges. Again, just this morning, I heard from a study of 6,000 companies in the United States, just 2% of those had females as a Latino Hispanic females as a CEO, 2%. And male probably is around 5%. So in a population, educated population, with so much heritage and tradition and history, there is still a lot of areas to go. In the 500 companies, again, even just because women and men, you have a lot of differences, and we cannot say yet that we are at the same level, just men and women, period, in general. But if that woman is a Latina, and that woman is an immigrant, and that woman has a color, and that woman has disability, and that woman has many of the intersection, then we have a lot of issues. We have a lot of restrictions that is not there yet. We are moving forward, we are progressing, but still there is a lot of to do, particularly, Susan, knowing the buying power of these communities. Again, $1.7 trillion buying power, more than 60 million people, the seventh economy in the world. We should put more attention because, again, and the decisions in this community, the buying power is made mostly by women. In that way, we had a lot of to do and a lot of to create opportunities, not just to diversify, to include, but more important, to give the same opportunities to anyone like many others have.
Just a quick follow-up. I know we have another question from the audience, but when you talk about the buying power of the Hispanic and Latino community, and I think marketers and business people are starting to pay more attention to this community, but years ago they didn't. In fact, there were some female Hispanic advertising executives that really sort of helped lead the way back in the 60s to try to shift the perceptions of the power of the community in terms of their buying power and their influence. Do you see that people are paying more attention and understanding the weight that the Hispanic and Latino community carries, not only in the business world, but in the voting world, in terms of our politics and just the influence of our country overall?
Yes, again, I have seen some changes, but there is still a lot to do. From the marketing perspective, for instance, we cannot just have the one-size-fits-all approach. No anymore. Again, it has to be bilingual, because there is, in Pennsylvania, I will say that based on this 2/3%, there is 1/3 or 35% that speak perfectly just English. There is another 35% that may speak just Spanish perfectly. And there is another 35% who may speak both, feel confident. That's when the 2/3 come to place. I am okay speaking in English, I am okay speaking in Spanish. I can move from one language to another without any difficulty. And that's the diversity that we have. In order to target this population, first of all, you have to change the dynamic. This is a family-oriented community. Even when you go to college, the decision is not just made by the student, it's the family involvement, because that's what we are, that's what we have. Not everyone, there is exceptions, but typical. In a healthcare decision making, there is a family involved. It's not just one individual, which is a little different in what's happening in America. When you go to college, not that the father or the mother don't care, it's more individualized decision making. But in the Latino Hispanic culture, it's more family-oriented decision-making. It's a consultation with the family. It's the extended family. It's not just my son and my daughter. It's my abuelito, abuelita, uncle, grandfather, grandmother, niece, cousin, and godmother, godfather, and how we extend this network when we rely and we call family.
All right, I have another question from YouTube for you. How can we help new English language speakers in our community looking to ensure that we don't let kids get marginalized due to a language gap?
You said English speakers, correct?
New English speakers, learning English.
Well, that's something that, again, as a member of the community, we emphasize with any member of our community. We have to learn the language. We don't want to replace anything. We just have to be able to speak the language. Let me just tell you a story. When I came to the United States, when I came as a resident, and I was doing the interview in the consulate, one of the recommendations that the consul from America made to me and asked me is, I already had my education. And he told me, was a man, and he told me, if you want to succeed and you had your education, you have to learn the language. And that's what I did as soon as I came to the United States. I was able to speak a little bit, but I went myself to educate and to learn the language right at the beginning. I invest time and efforts in order to do that. And I went to a community college and I learned ESL, English as a second language. And I moved with all the courses, and they took courses, college courses, because the second advice that I got from a very good friend of mine, hopefully she is in the audience, Yolanda, she was a professor at Harrisburg Community College, and she mentioned to me, you don't need just the regular language, the street language. You need the formal language because you already have the education. And was one of the greatest advices that I got. That's the reason I went to college and learned the formal language, because that had helped me to move ahead and to progress. In other words, that's the advice that we give to any person, we give to any person who comes to the United States, learn the language. It's so important. But at the same time, we also mention, keep talking in Spanish with your children. Keep teaching the language to your children and grandchildren. because they will need, and one day they will appreciate and recognize and thank you because of this opportunity. So in other words, yes, it's very important to recognize. Now there is another group of people, Caucasian, white members of the white community who want to learn Spanish, who are practicing Spanish, who will love to do this opportunity in the community to come and learn and practice Spanish. So it's in two ways, and I think the two are important and the two are so much needed in this community.
Hector, we have a comment from one of the viewers who said, "Thank you for the presentation. It has been a good reminder to be mindful in the assumptions made with those who speak Spanish or look Spanish." So tying into that, what can we all do? What can we do to be more enlightened, better allies? How can we help support the Hispanic and Latino communities?
Well, there's many ways that people can do. Celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month like you are doing, Susan, and the Hershey community is doing. It's a great beginning. Start celebrating, become part of, participate, share, has a day when sharing food, culture, traditions, language, and all of these elements can help to create a trustful relationship with people. I think that's the best approach. Have the opportunity to come and celebrate with them. Some different festivities that we have. In November, for instance, we have the Mexican community celebrate the Death Day, the Dia de los Muertos. And again, it's not traditional in all the Latino Hispanic communities, but it's traditional in many countries. And that's just one example. And there is many other opportunities that from the religious perspective, spiritual backgrounds, cultural, language, traditions, celebrations that people can make. But again, that's one thing, to join efforts. The second thing that we can do is to respect. Don't judge. Don't compare, because when I came to this country, I have the same issue, because I came from a background. I came from, in my view, the world that I live, and my understanding was the whole world is like the world that I have, which is not true. It's totally different. So be open to understand, not to judge. You don't have to lose your values, your beliefs. Just open and ask questions instead making assumptions or generalizing people, judging people. So that would be the second approach. Just be conscious enough, curious enough to ask questions, and be sure that you don't judge, you just listen, and with listening come understanding, and with understanding come respect. I think that's what we all deserve. Whatever we think, whatever belief system we may have, I think it's a good approach to create better relationships, and I will say peaceful relationships with members who are from diverse backgrounds in our community.
I was interested when you mentioned about LatinX and Latino and Latina, that's very few members of the Latino community really are aware of or expect or embrace the LatinX term. And I think for all of us, we want to make sure that we're being so inclusive and thoughtful. But are there times where maybe that term, that Latinx, maybe isn't really relevant to people, and we should just, as always, just kind of ask and put ourselves out there to ask what's most appropriate for them, what's most comfortable for them?
You are right. And again, I have seen in many settings that they are replacing one word instead of the others. And again, you are creating some greater issues because you are selective, because you think sounds better, or because you heard one person saying that. And we should not do that. In order to be inclusive, I would prefer to call all of them. That's replacing one of them, because again, you are going to be creating offense to a bigger group of people. And that's not what we are looking for. We have to be intentional. And in order to be intentional, we have to be curious and just educate ourselves. And that would be my recommendation. But again, it's very diverse. I don't blame anyone. It's a very diverse group of people that come from different backgrounds, from different beliefs, and it's different to categorize in just one group that we all can understand. Because again, just happening just in America, and it's bigger and bigger every day. And that's what we have to understand and we have to recognize.
Are any final thoughts before we wrap up tonight?
Well, I will say two things. Again, keep in mind that culture is very dynamic, that we are changing all the time. Myself, I cannot say that I am the person that I came 20 years ago. I have evolved in different ways as an individual, as a professional, as a member of my community. But one thing is true, as we learn, as we recognize new ways of learning, I become better. I become better because I can be able to understand better. I can be able to recognize differences, not make assumptions. And more importantly, we engage with the wider community. It doesn't matter what nationality you have, what culture you had, what origin you had, what language do you speak. At the end, like somebody says, we're in the same boat. And we want to be sure that in the same boat, go in the same direction. As a country, as a nation, as a community. Be able to learn, open to learn. I just mentioned that I came from Switzerland. And one of the commitments that I made this public, when I see that in Switzerland, most of the people speak French. And I said, well, I want to learn French because I want to recognize those differences. And there is millions of people who speak French, even in the United States, come from French speaking countries and people who had French as the first language. Be open to learn. There is no time limit on that. We can learn until the last day that we have the opportunity to leave. And again, I made a commitment to learn, and I'm doing this publicly now. I will learn another language, and there is always opportunity to learn, to be open, to be flexible, to be mindful, and more importantly, to be able to interrelate, to reconnect with people and create a better community. Thank you very much again, Susan, Amy, and all of you who had been with us tonight. Has been a great pleasure to share some thoughts. Again, it's just my thoughts, but more than happy to follow up this conversation in the community. You know how to contact me. And again, this is an ongoing process. Doesn't end, doesn't finish with one training, with one conversation. Must be ongoing, and we all can learn from this. Thank you very much again. Have everyone a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Really wonderful. I learned so much listening to you, and it's one thing is made clear that trying to find one or two words to encompass all like is, you know, the Latin Hispanic community is just not possible. So it was really interesting.
And I love the lifelong learning part. And I think good luck with the French lessons, Hector. I tried to learn French in college, but I spoke French with a Spanish accent because that was the first language I learned after English. So I wish you lots of luck. So I hope it goes better for you than it did for me. So
merci beaucoup.
I do want to remind everyone that our next event will be Wednesday, November 10th, and we will be hearing from State Representative Patty Kim on stopping Asian hate. So you will be receiving an email about that soon if you were registered for this presentation. So thank you very much. And I also want to do a quick thank you to the Hershey Company, who sent a wonderful gift basket to Dr. Ortiz for sharing his knowledge with us tonight. So thank you very much to the Hershey Company.
And I'd like to extend my thanks to the Hershey Public Library. They put together a wonderful reading list for Hispanic Heritage Month, and we're going to put that in the notes of this YouTube video so everyone can reference that and visit either the Hershey Public Library or their own community library to check out those resources and many, many more. And I also wanted to thank Brian Blausch, the IT manager from Derry Township, who is the magician behind this event tonight and making sure that everything runs smoothly, both with our Zoom webinar piece and with our YouTube live stream. So thank you, Brian, for always being willing to step forward so that we can share these really important educational sessions with the community. Big thanks to Lauren Turnbull from HENR, Hershey Entertainment Resorts, one of our partners in Hershey area, All Things Diversity, for helping with tonight's session and monitoring the questions. And of course, big thanks to Amy Ziegler from the Hershey Story Museum and the Hershey Gardens for all of her hard work. And mostly thanks to you, Hector, for a wonderful session. We could not have done this without you. Many, many thanks. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.